The forest does not forget the old ways. A million years ago, in the deep silent shadows beneath a canopy so thick it smothered the sun, the rules of life were written in a language of fear and instinct. This was a world where the air itself could turn against you, where the very branches you trusted for safety could hide a patient, calculating death. We were not the hunters then, we were the hunted, and the most terrifying predators were the ones we never saw coming, the architects of silk and shadow that turned the treetops into a labyrinth of nightmares. They did not stalk with tooth and claw, but with a silent, perfect patience, waiting for a single misstep, a single cry in the dark that would never be heard again. If you are ready to step back into this lost world of constant vigilance and terror, to understand the creatures that shaped our deepest fears, then like and subscribe, and join us as we descend into the whispering green hell of the past. Your journey into the abyss is just beginning. The air in the upper world was a different kind of thick, not with the rotting dampness of the forest floor, but with a thin, biting cold that clawed at the lungs. Here, 100 feet above the safety of the ground, the rules changed. The giant eagle's nest, a monstrous fortress of woven branches and dried moss, was an island in a sea of swirling mist and treacherous winds. It was a sanctuary, but a precarious one, a cradle of life balanced on the edge of a deadly precipice. The eaglet, a clumsy ball of down and desperate hunger, knew nothing of the abyss that surrounded it. Its world was the rough texture of the nest, the sharp scent of pine resin, and the overwhelming shadow of its mother, a living bulwark against the unknown. The mother eagle, a creature of hardened muscle and fierce instinct, did not simply watch the sky for rivals. Her gaze was a constant sweeping patrol of the branches that formed the labyrinthine ceiling of her world, a network of gnarled pathways that did not belong to her. Every creak of wood, every rustle of a leaf that was not born from the wind, sent a jolt of pure electricity through her formidable frame. This was a vigilance born from a deep genetic memory, a fear etched into the very code of her species by a predator that defied all the conventional laws of the hunt. It was a fear of the silent things, the patient things, the weavers of the world's most beautiful and deadly traps. The true master of this vertical realm was not the eagle with its piercing cry and thunderous wings, but a creature that moved with the silence of a shifting shadow. It was a spider, but to call it merely that was to call a hurricane a breeze. This was a hunter that had evolved beyond the simple snare, its mind a complex map of strategy and patience. Its body, the size of a man's hand, was a masterpiece of camouflage, its coloration a perfect mimicry of lichen and weathered bark, making it a ghost in the architecture of the trees. It did not scuttle or hurry. Its 8 legs moved with a slow, deliberate, fluid grace, each step a calculated placement that made no sound, dislodged not a single speck of pollen. It was a predator that understood its domain not as a territory to be conquered, but as a weapon to be wielded. The labyrinth of branches was its hunting ground, a 3-dimensional chessboard where it was always the reigning queen. And in the center of this board was the eagle's nest, a beacon of sound and smell and movement, a potential feast that called out through the silence. The spider's approach was not a charge, but a slow, inexorable convergence. It would spend hours, sometimes entire days, motionless, its cluster of black eyes absorbing every detail of the nest's routine, the mother's patterns of absence and presence, the blind, trusting movements of the chick. It was learning the rhythm of their lives, searching for the one fleeting moment of vulnerability, the instant the mother was distracted by a distant cry, or lured away by the desperate need to hunt for herself, leaving the eaglet alone in its fortress of sticks. The tension in the high canopy was a physical force, a wire pulled taut between the fierce, active protection of the mother and the absolute, silent patience of the spider. It was a battle of 2 opposing kinds of intelligence, one loud and visceral, the other quiet and utterly calculating. And as the wind picked up, causing the great tree to sway and the nest to creak ominously, that moment of terrible opportunity was finally drawing near. The mother eagle turned her head, her attention snagged for a single fatal second by the movement of a distant monkey troop. In the profound, waiting silence that followed, a single strand of silk, strong as steel and delicate as morning dew, began to slowly bridge the gap between the hunting branch and the edge of the nest. That first strand of silk was more than a thread. It was the first line of a sentence being written in a language of pure predation. It drifted on the faintest breath of wind, a glimmering probe sent into the enemy's territory. The mother eagle, her senses tuned to a razor's edge, saw it. Her head snapped around, a low, guttural warning rumbling in her chest. It was not a sound of anger, but of primal recognition. With a precise, violent slash of her beak, she severed the silken line, the tiny filament coiling back into the void like a scolded serpent. But the retreat was an illusion. The spider, feeling the vibration of the break through the very wood of the branch, did not startle. It simply waited. It had calculated this resistance into its strategy. The first strand was a test, a way to measure the eagle's alertness. For the next hour, nothing happened. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The eaglet, sensing its mother's tension, huddled deeper into the nest, its soft cheeps the only sound. Then, a new strand appeared, this one from a different angle, lower and more hidden by a knot in the tree. The eagle was forced to shift her position, her great wings mantling over her young, her eyes darting between multiple points of potential approach. This was the spider's true weapon, not speed, but psychological siege. It was forcing the eagle to defend a perimeter that was constantly, silently shifting. High above, the spider began its work in earnest. Its spinnerets moved with the fluid precision of a master weaver, laying down bridge lines, anchor lines, a complex framework of connections between the surrounding branches. This was not a web in the traditional orb-shaped sense. That would be too obvious, too easily destroyed. This was something far more sinister, a transportation network, a series of tight ropes and highways that allowed the spider to move around the nest with terrifying speed and silence. Its eight-legged gait a perfectly balanced glide. The eagle was a creature of the open air, of dramatic dives and powerful thrusts. She was built for a world of clear lines and direct confrontation. The spider was a creature of the in-between spaces, the hidden corners, the world of angles and shadows. It was turning the eagle's own fortress into a cage, surrounding it with invisible tripwires and silent pathways. The mother would spin and lunge, snapping at a flicker of movement to her left, only to hear a faint, skittering tap from a branch directly behind her. She was being toyed with, her immense power rendered useless against an enemy that refused to engage. Fatigue began to set in, a dangerous lethargy in the muscles and a fog in the mind. The spider, driven by a cold, relentless metabolism, felt no such drain. It watched, it calculated, it adapted. Its goal was not to fight the eagle, but to exhaust her, to overwhelm her senses until her legendary vigilance finally, inevitably cracked. The standoff stretched on, the sun beginning its slow descent, painting the canopy in long, distorted shadows that played tricks on the eyes. Every shifting shadow became a potential threat, every rustling leaf the sound of an approaching killer. The eagle's reactions became slower, more frantic, less precise. She was a soldier under constant, invisible bombardment, her nerves fraying into raw, exposed ends. And then came the moment the spider had engineered for hours. A larger animal, perhaps a small, browsing prehistoric deer, moved through the undergrowth far below. The sound was distant, but significant enough to trigger the eagle's deep-seated hunting instinct. Her head turned, her body tensing for a fraction of a second too long. It was the lapse. The spider, poised on a branch directly above the nest, felt the shift in the eagle's focus through the very vibrations in the tree. In the deep gathering twilight, it began its final silent descent, not on a single strand, but rappelling down its pre-laid network of lines, a dark liquid shadow dripping directly toward the huddled, defenseless eaglet. The descent was not a fall, but a controlled liquid pour of jointed limbs and concentrated purpose. The spider became an extension of the deepening twilight, a patch of living darkness detaching itself from the canopy above. There was no sound, not even the whisper of air against its chitinous hide. Below, the eaglet remained oblivious, a soft warm pulse of life nestled in the rough cradle of the nest. Its world was the familiar scent of its mother and the comforting solidity of the branches beneath it. It had no concept of the death descending from the world above, a death that moved with the patience of a glacier and the finality of a falling stone. The mother eagle's senses, however, were a web of their own, stretched to breaking point. It was not a sight or a sound that alerted her, but a subtler change, a shift in the air pressure, a minute alteration in the tapestry of shadows that draped her home. Her head snapped upward, her golden eyes, capable of spotting a fish twitching beneath the surface of a river a mile away, locked onto the descending shape. A scream tore from her beak, not of fear but of pure incandescent rage. It was a sound that shattered the forest's silence, a sonic blast meant to intimidate and disorient. The spider, however, was immune to such displays. It simply paused its descent, hanging motionless a mere 10 feet above the nest, a patient, 8-legged pendulum. What followed was a battle of nanoseconds and millimeters. The eagle launched herself upward, not in flight, but in a powerful, thrusting leap from the edge of the nest, her talons outstretched like a cluster of scimitars. She was a force of nature unleashed, a whirlwind of feathers and fury. But the spider was no longer there. With a twitch of a leg, it retracted its line, shooting back up into the safety of its complex aerial highway. The eagle's talons closed on empty air. She landed back on the nest, her chest heaving, her cry now a frustrated guttural shriek. The eaglet, terrified by the sudden violence, let out a piercing cheep. That single high-pitched cry of its offspring seemed to flip a switch in the eagle's primal brain. The strategic patience of the hunter was gone, replaced by the raw, desperate aggression of a parent. She could not leave the nest to attack the spider's network, for that would leave her chick utterly exposed. She was tethered, chained to the one spot the spider wanted to reach. The spider, in turn, began a new, more terrifying tactic. It started to vibrate. Using its legs and body, it sent a series of complex rhythmic pulses down its anchor lines and into the very structure of the nest. The vibrations were not random. They were a mimicry, a grotesque parody of the movements of prey, the frantic fluttering of a trapped bird, the scuttling of a large insect. To the eagle's hyperacute senses, it was as if the nest itself was coming alive with tantalizing, distracting movements. She stabbed her beak into the woven sticks. She twisted her head. Her focus shattered into a dozen conflicting impulses. This was the spider's masterstroke, to turn the defender's greatest strength, her sensory perception, against her. The eagle was being systematically driven mad, her world reduced to a vibrating, shadow-filled box of confusion and false alarms. Her energy, which needed to last through the long, cold night, was being poured out in frantic, useless bursts. She was a magnificent fortress under siege, not by a battering ram, but by an invisible gas that corroded the will of the defenders. Exhaustion began to weigh her wings down, and a dull, helpless terror began to glint in her fierce eyes. The spider, sensing the breaking point nearing, chose its moment. As the eagle spun to face a phantom tremor to her left, the hunter dropped one last time, this time from the side, its trajectory a silent, diagonal slash aimed not at the eaglet, but at the eagle itself. It was not seeking to kill the adult. That was a fight it would likely lose. It was seeking a foothold, a single, precarious attachment on the great bird's back, from where it could wait and bite, and inject a venom that would slow, paralyze, and finally silence the nest's only protector forever. But this was not a hunt for food. This was a strategic strike, an injection designed for something far more sinister than a quick kill. The spider's final lunge was not an act of desperation, but the culmination of its geometric hunt. a move calculated with the cold precision of a grandmaster ending a game of chess. Its target was not a killing blow, but a strategic foothold. It landed on the eagle's back, not with a thud, but with the faintest tickle of settling legs, a sensation so slight it was almost lost in the storm of the bird's own frantic movements. For a single horrifying second, the eagle did not understand. She twisted her head, her beak snapping at the empty air behind her, unable to reach the dark passenger that had now anchored itself securely between her powerful wing muscles. Then came the bite. It was not a savage tearing of flesh, but a precise, almost surgical injection. The spider's fangs, evolved to penetrate the armored exoskeletons of giant prehistoric insects, found purchase in the softer tissue at the base of the eagle's neck. The venom it delivered was a different cocktail altogether. A neurotoxin refined over millions of years specifically for this kind of confrontation. The effect was not immediate death, but a creeping paralysis. The eagle's next cry caught in her throat, emerging as a choked, gurgling rasp. A wave of profound weakness washed over her, causing her massive wings to droop and tremble uncontrollably. Her legs buckled and she slumped against the side of the nest, her fierce golden eyes clouding with a film of helpless terror. She was still conscious, still aware of the desperate cheeps of her offspring, but the connection between her will and her body was being systematically severed. The spider detached itself, dropping back onto the nest floor with that same unnerving silence. It did not immediately advance on the eaglet. It first moved to the paralyzed mother, its front legs gently tapping and probing, reading the fading tremors in her muscles like a doctor checking a pulse. It was confirming the success of its strategy. Only when it was certain the great bird was no longer a threat did it turn its attention to the main prize. The eaglet, sensing the collapse of its world, could only huddle and shiver, a pathetic ball of down staring up at the multi-lensed eyes of its executioner. The spider approached with the same deliberate, unhurried pace it had used to cross the high branches. There was no need for haste now. The siege was over. The fortress had fallen from within. This specific, horrifying interaction was not an isolated incident, but a relentless shaping force in the deep past. The terror of the shadow spiders was woven into the very DNA of the birds that shared their world. It forged behaviors that persist to this day: the frantic, aggressive defense of nests, the constant removal of foreign silk, the deep-seated aversion to the intricate, sticky traps that still hang in the forests of our modern world. We are witnessing the echoes of this ancient war in the panic of a songbird whose nest has been touched by a common garden spider. The memory is that old, that deeply ingrained, but the story of these spiders does not end in that prehistoric nest. Their evolutionary path is a dark and disturbing thread that leads to even more unsettling possibilities. For if a lineage of hunters could perfect the art of subduing the most powerful avian guardians, what other, more terrifying strategies might have evolved in the hidden, forgotten corners of the world? What happens when the hunter itself becomes the hunted, or when its own instincts are twisted into something far more parasitic, far more alien? What if the most terrifying predators are the ones we have not yet found, the ones whose very existence defies our understanding of the natural order? The fate of that single eaglet 1,000,000 years ago was a tiny, silent tragedy in a vast, teeming world. But on the grand canvas of deep time, such tiny tragedies are the brushstrokes that paint masterpieces of evolutionary pressure. The shadow spiders were not monsters of myth. They were a potent, real-world selective force. Their success meant that only the most vigilant, the most aggressive, the most instinctively aware birds would live long enough to pass on their genes. This was a silent arms race, fought not with tooth and claw, but with venom and vigilance, played out over countless generations in the green gloom of the canopy. But to assume this race had only two runners, the spider and the bird, is to underestimate the sheer, terrifying creativity of evolution. Nature, in its relentless experimentation, often takes a winning formula and twists it into something far more bizarre, far more disturbing. Consider the theory of the parasitic hijacker. If a spider could master the art of neutralizing a parent, what was to stop another lineage from evolving to exploit the spider itself? Imagine a different kind of arachnid, one that lost its appetite for building intricate snares or conducting daring raids. Instead, it developed a different strategy. It would seek out the egg sacs of its larger, more powerful cousins, the shadow spiders themselves. This invader would not destroy the eggs. It would lay its own single foreign egg amidst the hundreds, a sleeper agent in the nursery. When the eggs hatched, the tiny parasitic young, armed with specialized mouthparts or a camouflaging chemical disguise, would begin its dark work. It would feed, not on the provided food, but on its foster siblings, one by one, consuming its way through the brood until it alone remained, fattened and ready to mature, having turned the spider's own reproductive success into a grisly buffet for a single, imposter offspring. This is not mere speculation. We see echoes of this in the parasitoid wasps of our own time, whose life cycles are horror stories written in living flesh. And if our minds can bend to accept that, then we must peer into a deeper, darker abyss of possibility. The fossil record is a book with most of its pages missing. It tells us of the giants, the megalodons, and the mammoths, but it is virtually silent on the small, soft-bodied architects of silk and venom that ruled the micro-wilderness. The conditions that preserved the shadow spiders of the past were so exceptionally rare that their existence is largely a ghost in the machine, inferred from the behaviors they instilled in their prey. This leaves a haunting, unanswerable question hanging in the air of prehistory. Did they all truly die out? The world is still vast, still veiled in impenetrable jungles and unexplored cave systems that sunlight never touches. Could a relic population of these sophisticated hunters have persisted in some isolated pocket of the planet, their silent geometric hunts continuing unseen by human eyes? It is a terrifying thought that a million-year-old war might still be raging in the treetops of some lost world, a ghost from the past waiting to be rediscovered. The rules of that ancient world, where the air could turn against you, where fear was a physical presence, may not be as extinct as we believe, and this descent into the predatory abyss does not end with the ghosts of the past. The same evolutionary forces that forged the shadow spiders are still at work today, weaving new nightmares in the sun-dappled corners of our world. To witness their living air is to confront a reality that feels like a challenge from a world gone mad. To see the terrifying truth behind a creature known as the giant spider that eats birds. To see it is to ask the haunting question, has evolution, in its boundless amoral creativity, finally gone too far? That story and its answer awaits you next.